Hello, dear team at Carb King. We read that a lot in emails, followed by the question, could you please show us how to replace this diaphragm on the slide? Because mine has a hole in it. Or, I slipped with the screwdriver. Yes, we hear a lot of different stories, and up until now we haven't had a single video on this topic. But that's going to change. You're about to see how to replace the diaphragm on the slide for your motorcycle. Now, of course, the question arises, when do I even need to replace this diaphragm? I always say in our videos that you should carefully check the diaphragm, and now you might find a spot that looks like this one here. You can see that it's already damaged on the surface. I always run my glove or finger behind it so you can clearly see the damaged spot. And when I find damage, I use a small, strong flashlight to shine behind it. Here, we don't see any light yet, even though there's a visible small damage up top. Now let's take a look at this other diaphragm I found for you. It looks similar, but when I shine the light behind it, you can clearly see that a small hole has already formed. You often find these spots in different areas. Here on the surface, it already looks a bit worn as well. When I shine the light here, you can see a tiny hole. It's a bit of work, but I can tell you that when it looks like this, even if no light shines through yet, it usually won't take long before a small hole forms. So if you've already taken the trouble to thoroughly clean the carburetor and are installing a new repair kit, which you can find in our video description, you should also check out our shop and order the diaphragm right away. It's one of the very few shops in Europe that sells these high-quality diaphragms. And please remember to order the correct number of diaphragms. I always replace all the diaphragms, even if only one is damaged. Usually, it doesn't take long for the others to wear out too. Now, this is specifically about the diaphragm for your carburetor, so for your motorcycle, and it looks like this. As I said, the link is in the video description. If you've received this set, the bag contains the diaphragms in the correct quantity, the adhesive, and a small instruction guide. Please keep everything, including the bag, because we'll need it. You'll also need a small piece of wood, a sharp utility knife, which we've linked in the video description, a marker, and silicone spray. For your motorcycle, this upper plastic ring needs to be cut off and won't be needed for reassembly. First, though, we need to mark the position of this little tab here. This tab must be reinstalled in the exact same position on the slide. For that, we'll use the marker, and I recommend working as precisely as possible. If you draw a line on the old diaphragm here, it's no problem at all. And if the line goes over the plastic ring, that's also fine. So please work as accurately as possible here. And the mark should be visible on the metal part of the slide. It's important to note, if you want to put the slide into the ultrasonic cleaner after removing the diaphragm, you should mechanically mark the slide. The mark will likely disappear in the ultrasonic cleaner, and then you won't know how to properly position the diaphragm afterward. Now that we've marked everything carefully, fold the diaphragm down and lay the slide at an angle on this small piece of wood. You can, of course, approach this differently, but for me, this method has proven to be the best. If you have a sturdy utility knife like this one, you can work with some pressure from above to cut the plastic ring. As I mentioned, you won't need this ring afterward. You can also use a pair of side cutters, but I find I can make good progress with this method. It's almost cut through. Now I'm cutting from the other side. The diaphragm is damaged anyway, so if it tears, it's no big deal. Here is the lower ring made of metal. Sometimes it's plastic, so you'll need to be more careful. Please don't damage the lower ring, so work cautiously. Now the plastic ring is open. We can remove it now. You can toss it along with the diaphragm, since it's damaged anyway. Now you have your slide with the mark. It's super important to clean it again thoroughly, so the new diaphragm can adhere properly. As you can see, I made a small scratch on the lower ring. If that happens to you, please carefully sand it with sandpaper to smooth it out. So friends, I have 4 new diaphragms in front of me because I'm working on a carburetor from a 4-cylinder engine. I'll take one, and the first thing you need to check is if the edge is facing downward. Sometimes, during packaging, it gets pushed in the opposite direction. If you install it like this, you'll have a problem, because the diaphragm won't fit into the groove of the carburetor. The other side looks a bit different. I just wanted to point that out. So please pay attention. When you place the diaphragm on your hand, the edge should face downward. This edge will sit in the groove of the carburetor housing. You can see a difference there. Now you can try fitting it without adhesive. It's a bit tricky and takes some practice. The diaphragm needs to be placed with the tab at the marked spot. It helps if someone holds the slide for you while you work. If you have someone to assist, it's much easier. If you use a vise, be very careful not to damage the slide. Now this small edge that I'm showing you has to fit into the groove of the slide. All of this needs to be in the right position. Keep in mind, you'll also be adding super glue. You need to be aware that the glue starts to set quickly, so you don't have much time to adjust the position. One important note, the glue doesn't affect this surface, but please avoid getting it on the diaphragm itself. That would create a hard spot, which wouldn't be flexible anymore, and the diaphragm would wear out much faster. I recommend practicing this a few times so you can get the diaphragm aligned with the tab at the marked spot. Once you've applied the adhesive, there's no second chance. It has to work on the first try. Okay, friends, moving on. In the meantime, I've done 2 things. I cleaned the entire upper part, including the groove and the lower plate, with brake cleaner to remove any grease. If needed, you can also use glass cleaner. It has to be very clean and grease-free, otherwise the glue won't bond properly. In another area, far from where we're working, I sprayed the bag that the diaphragms came in with silicone spray. This coats the bag with silicone spray, and you'll need to do this before gluing each diaphragm. We'll be pressing the diaphragm onto that surface, and we don't want it to stick, so we use the silicone spray as a release agent. Now take your slide. As I mentioned, it must be completely clean, and grab the superglue that came with your kit. The diaphragm is ready and checked, and you have it ready to go in the correct position. Personally, I start applying the glue opposite the mark. As I slowly rotate the slide, I eventually see the mark again and know that I'm almost done applying the glue. The glue needs to go into the groove all the way around, and also on the lower plate here, roughly in the middle. A thin layer of glue is enough. Not too close to this edge or that edge. It should be applied around the middle. I'm going to do this carefully now. Take your time, no rush. So I start from the opposite side of the marking, and now I apply the glue thinly into the groove. Try to do it without too many interruptions. If there's a small gap, it's not a problem. Just apply a thin layer, that's enough. Now I can see the marking over here, so I know I'm almost all the way around. Then once more, as I said, in the middle here, add a thin layer of glue. That's okay, looks good. Tighten the glue cap and set it aside. And now comes the part you've practiced. It needs to work on the first try. Align the tab with the marking, and the diaphragm must be placed here. And please, be careful not to smear the glue onto the diaphragm itself. So this is how it looks now. It worked perfectly. Now fold the diaphragm back down very carefully. Now place it on the surface that we sprayed with silicone spray. Now press the diaphragm down for 1 minute. This means applying steady pressure from above for a full minute. Now you can carefully lift it off. That's why we use the silicone spray, so it doesn't stick. Take a look, everything looks good on top. A bit of silicone on the diaphragm isn't a problem at all. Now fold it back into its normal position so you can check underneath. And look, it looks perfect. This is exactly how it should look, with the edge fully seated all around. And one more very important thing, don't install it immediately. Let it cure for 8 hours, very important. So just set it aside, and after 8 hours, you can continue with installing the slide into the carburetor. Please remember to check the video description. You'll find all the materials you need there, including fully assembled slides if they're available for your motorcycle. This gives you the option to say, okay, before I take on this project, I'll just order a complete slide and install that instead. So friends, that's it from us for today with this video. As always, I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. I wish you much success with your project and lots of fun wrenching. See you in the next video. Later, Gator.